and welcome to what you've all been waiting for, and that's Life Science on Learn Extra Live. I'm Katleho, and this is Eugen. How are you, Eugen?
Good in yourself, Katleko.
Great, thank you. So today we're doing ecology. Please tell us more.
Well, we're going to focus on ecology again, and we're working with the energy pyramids, and we're going to look at how energy is transferred in an ecosystem.
Okay, awesome. That sounds really interesting. So you guys already know what to do. You need to stay focused today, and of course, keep chatting to us. You can go over to your board again.
Thanks.
So guys, you know exactly how to get hold of us. We have our Facebook page, facebook.com/Learn Extra, and we have our Twitter handle at Learn Extra. So just make sure that today you are the ultimate mindsetter, because I already know that Life Science, I was telling you again that Life Science is actually one of our mindsetters' favorite shows, and you guys tell me all the time how you love it. So today, show me how you love it and chat to us, please, guys. I am looking forward to you. I'm looking forward to you guys being on the show today. Over to you again.
Thanks, Katleko. Well, guys, I know it's your favorite subject, and let's enjoy this next hour. And as a matter of interest, do you guys remember why this is an important week? Yes, it's Arbor Week, and all that ties in with what we're doing today. And we're going to stress on how important plants are in the environment, and today we're going to look at how plants convert that energy that we need. And if they were not around, we obviously would not survive. And hence, do your bit. Plant a tree this week. Look after the trees, water them, nurture them. Join an organization, get involved in some of these initiatives, and I can guarantee you, investing in a tree today is the best thing that we could do. Let's get back to matters of the day. So, we've been focusing on ecology over the past couple of weeks. We've looked at the biosphere, we looked at the biomes. We will look at the biomes in the next couple of weeks. We've looked at how the abiotic factors and the biotic factors interact with each other. And today we're going to look at how energy flows in the ecosystem, and we're going to do that through studying different energy pyramids or ecological pyramids. Let's get down to work, guys. Right. So just to revise the concept of ecology, and we said that ecology was the study of the relationship between the biotic factors and the abiotic factors in the environment and how they interact with each other. Right. So if we just recap on what we've done already, here we see an image of the different factors interacting and influencing the environment. Here we've got the sun providing radiant energy, and that radiant energy is available to the organisms, and they will utilize that energy for photosynthesis, and they'll convert that energy into energy that is used by the different levels. We also see the effect of different physiographic factors in the environment. Let's move on to the next slide, and let's look at what food chains are. Last week we spoke about food chains, and we said that a food chain was an illustration or was a representation of energy was transferred from one organism to the next. Okay, so here we see a food chain set out in a flow diagram that shows how the organisms eat other organisms, and are in turn eaten by themselves. We discussed last week the different trophic levels, and just to recap on that, okay, so we looked at producers as being the organisms that photosynthesize and convert the radiant energy from the sun into chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis. We then looked at the first trophic level, which is normally made up of your primary consumers, and these are the organisms that will utilize the plants and convert that energy into their muscle, and that will be then a source of energy to your secondary consumers, who will in turn be the second trophic level. And we looked at how that energy is then available to the tertiary consumers in the third trophic level. And we also noted that along the food chain, energy is lost in the form of heat, and not all the energy is available to the next trophic level. We also spoke about the importance of the decomposers in an ecosystem and how they help return the nutrients into the nutrient cycle. We also looked at food webs, and we said that food chains do not exist exclusively by themselves. And in nature, we know that organisms have a variety of food on which they rely. And hence, in nature, in the wild, ecosystems, food chains are interconnected with other food chains. And we refer to that as a food web. So a food web is a series of interconnected food chains in an ecosystem. If we look at this simple food web, Here we see the primary producer being the plant, and here the plant produces energy which supplies the first trophic level, which is made up of beetles, a mouse, and a hare. And these in turn, as the primary consumers, provide energy to the secondary consumers, that would be the jackal, the eagle, and the snake. And we also see how these various food chains are interconnected into other food chains. And that is essentially very important in an ecosystem. To sustain that ecosystem, food chains need to be interconnected to ensure that organisms survive. Okay. Right. Let's look at ecological pyramids today. So we looked at how food chains and food webs are interconnected. Today we're looking at how that energy can be represented in a pyramid. And often a pyramid is a different method of illustrating information. During your life sciences lessons, you probably plotted graphs, which are illustrations or methods of expressing data that is collected from an experiment. Here we have food pyramids or ecological pyramids, which can be used to illustrate or to show how information or energy is passed on from one trophic level to the next. So food chains are food webs that can be represented using a pyramid. A pyramid is simply a bar graph or a histogram that is turned onto its side. And if you look at it carefully, that essentially is a pyramid. And if we were to turn this around, that would give us a pyramid. So we could call this a representation, a pyramid being a representation of a bar graph where we orientate the graph so that it faces or it gives us the shape of a pyramid, as you'd see that there. There are usually more organisms found at the base or the start of the food chain than at the top. When we look at examples as we go through, we would see that the base of the pyramid is normally larger. It is an indication of a larger number of organisms or more energy available at that trophic level. Each level in a pyramid represents a trophic or a feeding level. And we discussed trophic levels last week. We spoke about the first trophic level being made up of the producers, the second trophic level being made up of your primary consumers, your secondary and tertiary consumers form the second and third trophic levels respectively. So each level in a food pyramid or in a pyramid represents the different trophic levels. An ecological pyramid will always give us an idea about the amount of energy that is available at each trophic level. If we look at this food pyramid, we see different trophic levels. This is the first trophic level, the second, the third, and obviously this would be the fourth trophic level. And if we can recall what we did last week, we said that the first trophic level was made up of our primary producers, and these would essentially be the plants that would photosynthesize and convert radiant energy into chemical energy that is then available to the next trophic level. The second trophic level in this case is made up of herbivores, and these are your primary consumers. Again, we discussed herbivores, and we said that herbivores were plants that were organisms that exclusively fed off plant material. And here you would see this is a beetle, here we've got a rodent, a squirrel, and you've got some birds that exclusively feed on these plants. On the third trophic level here, we find that we've got our secondary consumers, which could be made up of both omnivores and carnivores. And to recap on what omnivores was, omnivores refer to organisms that feed on both plant and animal material, and your carnivores refer to organisms that feed exclusively on the meat or do not eat plants. Okay, right on the top, on the fourth trophic level, we have the top carnivores, and this forms the tertiary consumers. And in this pyramid, you can clearly see that as we move up to the top, the amount of energy available decreases. Something else that we also note is that the size of the organisms gradually decreases, and the amount of energy decreases as well. Very important, at the base of this pyramid, we find decomposers. And these decomposers, we discussed their importance last week, and we said that they play a very important role in converting dead organic matter returning that back into the soil so that it could replenish and return into the nutrient cycle so that it's available to producers all over again. Okay. When we study pyramids, there are three different types of pyramids that we look at. We look at a pyramid of numbers. That's obviously the illustration of the number of organisms in a food chain. We could also represent in food pyramids showing their biomass, and we'll discuss more about biomass as we get to that. As well as we could look at the representation of a food chain using the pyramid of energy, which is essentially showing how energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. Let's look at the number of the pyramid of numbers in the next slide. Okay, right. So a pyramid of numbers will illustrate the number of individuals at each trophic level. We'll find that the producers are the most numerous, and they will form the base of the pyramid. In any food chain, we saw that producers will always be the organisms that produce the energy. We said that they can photosynthesize because they contain chlorophyll and they can convert that energy into chemical energy. And hence, at most pyramids, the producers would be made up of plants that are capable of photosynthesizing. Okay. The number of organisms in each trophic level become fewer as we move up the pyramid. And we'll talk about this in a little while. Let's look at this pyramid. This pyramid illustrates the number of individuals at each trophic level, so we will call this a number pyramid. Here we see the number of producers in this pyramid. There are 5 million producers. This obviously refers to the plants in an area. These obviously then provide energy and they provide food to the second trophic level, which is made up of herbivores. And if you think about the relationship between the plant and the herbivores, there will always be less herbivores available. So this is a 700,000 herbivores which feed off the plant material. In turn, these herbivores are a source of energy to your carnivores, and we have 3,000 carnivores that feed off herbivores. And right on the top, on the fourth trophic level, we've got our tertiary consumers, and these would be your predators, and these are only 10 in number. So what we see as we gradually move up this pyramid, that the numbers of the individuals at each trophic level decrease. In order for any ecosystem to be sustainable, we would need to have the number of individuals decreasing as the trophic levels increase. What would happen if that was turned around? Simply, what would happen if the tertiary consumer numbers were 1,000? Would there be enough energy available from the secondary consumers? More than unlikely. This simply means that in order for an ecosystem to be sustainable, the number of individuals at each trophic level will gradually decrease so that the energy available can sustain the needs of each trophic level. Very good. Let's move on. Right. So we're still on the pyramid of numbers. Here we see two different types of pyramid of numbers. Here we're looking at a pyramid of numbers of a grassland community. And in this we see we've got producers, again, as on our first trophic level. We've got herbivores in the second trophic level and your consumers in the third trophic level. And let's look at which are these organisms occupying the different levels. So we have plants as usual, and these are 200 glass plants. And hence, the length of this line indicates the number of organisms. On the second trophic level, we have 10 field mice. And if we look at the length of this bar on that pyramid, will represent the number of individuals. Right on the top, on the third trophic level, we've got a narrower bar, and that refers to a single spotted owl. I will show you illustrations of spotted owls. And if you recall, the spotted owl is the predator, and obviously he would be perched right on top of this tree, and he'd be feeding off the field mice, and the field mice in turn will be feeding off in the grass that's available to them. So when we look at this pyramid, we can clearly see the amount of energy decreasing. More importantly, the number of individuals at each trophic level gradually decreasing. In diagram B, we look at we look at the number of individuals in a community, in a baobab tree community. And obviously, if you guys have seen your textbooks, you would have seen the baobab trees. These are these huge trees, and obviously they could be an entire community by themselves, it could support an entire community by itself. Here we see a single producer on the first trophic level, and obviously because it's a huge tree, we refer to that as one baobab tree. However, the amount of energy available in that would be able to sustain an entire food chain. And let's look at what's the second trophic level. When we look at the second trophic level, we see that the second trophic level is, the length of that indicates 1,000 caterpillars. So these caterpillars feed off the leaves of the baobab trees. And in turn, on the third trophic level, we've got hornbills which feed off caterpillars. And here we have 2 hornbills that live on this tree which feed off the caterpillars. These are the primary consumers, and you'd see that the number of individuals are much less than the number of caterpillars that we saw in the second trophic level. Finally, on the third trophic level, we've got your secondary consumers, and we have a single black eagle that would in turn feed on the hornbills. Here we see a slightly unusual pyramid, only because the baobab is a huge tree, but the amount of energy available in it does equate to being sufficient to supply the energy to the caterpillars that form the second trophic level. So why does that energy decrease as we move on to the next trophic level? We saw that during the transfer of energy from the first trophic level to the second trophic level, lots of that energy goes into the physiology of the animal. And we know that in winter we tend to eat a lot of food, and it's not because we're hungry and greedier at that time, but I think it's because of the energy that we need to heat our bodies up. We tend to lose lots of energy to the cold environment, and hence we tend to eat a little bit more so that the body sustains the heat, the temperature that we need it to. If you look at animals that normally hibernate, they will tend to eat lots of food before the winter sleep, and that energy will provide the fuel to produce the heat during their winter sleep. And that is how energy is lost to the environment from one trophic level to the next. Okay. So if we look at this, you see that as we go up a food chain, the number of organisms in each food chain becomes much lower. So we see that the number of organisms become much lower. Here we've got 10,000 blades of grass, we've got 100 zebra that feed off that, and 10 lions that rely on those zebras to sustain the energy needs. Right. The next...
Again, before you start on that, would we go for an ad break? Would you like to?
I'd love to have an ad break.
Okay, let's
you guys can catch up. And yeah.
Yeah, guys, let's go for a quick ad break just so that you guys can get your minds refreshed and ready for the next segment. See you now.